On January 31st, 1968, while millions of Vietnamese celebrated the Lunar New Year Tet, a war that had already dragged on for years suddenly exploded into something much bigger. The Vietnam War was a brutal conflict between North Vietnam and the Communist Viet Cong against South Vietnam and the United States. U.S. leaders believed the enemy was weakening. American troops were told victory was close, but North Vietnam had a different plan. In the early hours of Tet, around 85,000 to 100,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a coordinated attack across more than 100 cities in South Vietnam. One of the bloodiest battles took place in Hue, an ancient city that was occupied for weeks before U.S. and South Vietnamese forces retook it. The destruction was massive, and fighting was close quarters and brutal. Militarily, the United States and South Vietnam eventually pushed back the attacks and inflicted heavy losses on the enemy, but politically the Tet Offensive changed everything. Even though the U.S. technically won the battles, the scale of the attack shocked American citizens and contradicted government claims that the war was almost over. Public support for the war dropped sharply. News coverage of the Tet Offensive reached millions of homes across the United States. Images of intense fighting in major cities contradicted reports that many Americans had heard from government officials. Anti-war protests grew larger and criticism of the government policies increased. President Lyndon B. Johnson faced mounting pressure from both public and political leaders. Only weeks after the offensive, Johnson announced that he would not seek another term as president. The Tet Offensive had transformed the national conversation about the war. The Tet Offensive did not immediately end the Vietnam War. In fact, the conflict continued for several more years. Yet historians often view Tet as a major turning point. The offensive demonstrated that wars are not decided by only victories on the battlefield. Public opinion, political decisions, and media coverage can be just as important. 50 years later, the Tet Offensive remains one of the most significant events of the Vietnam War and a powerful example of how a single military operation can change the course of history.